welcome to another episode of Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight we're going to talk about the Green Children of Woolpit and Mary King's Clothes. My name is Spooky, and here comes Raven.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, so it's been a little cold here. How about there?
Well, I got the heat on, so it must be at least down to the 60s.
Right. So tonight we're going to do like a little different, urban legends like Halloweenish, and then also the Mary King's Clothes, because they've had a lot of paranormal activity down there as well, right?
Yeah, it's they've had a lot of paranormal activity down there. It's a tourist attraction, and personally I found the history quite interesting.
Right. Well, I was thinking let's start off with the Green Children of Woolpit. What do you think?
I think that's a good idea.
All right. Sometime during like the 12th century, monastic chronicler, like a medieval writer,
Right.
in England by the name of Jarvis of Tilbury, as well as another guy named William of Newbury and Ralph of Coghill, all recorded a strange account of these two children who suddenly appeared near a small town near Battersea Emids, England. Now, if we combined all of their recording and their stories together, it kind of weaves like this really bizarre story which everybody claims to be true. But basically, one warm, sunny day in the 12th century, some farmers and other residents of a small town of Woolpit, England, were startled to see two young children wandering around. They were basically like disoriented and just seemed, out of place. And they were in the ancient pits, which they used to call like wolf pits. And it's kind of
Right.
like
And for anybody that doesn't know what a wolf pit is, it's just a hole dug in the ground, or it's
kind of like a cave-ish type thing.
kind of caveish like, or it's all rocked in, and that they
Like
were
trenches
actually
and
dug
pits.
to trap animals.
Right. And they were kind of wandering around near the mouth of it. Well, when a few of the farmers approached the frightened kids, they were shocked and kind of startled when they noticed that they had their skin was kind of like an olive green color, and yet the rest of their features totally seemed normal, except for their skin was just totally green. Now, they reported saying that their clothes was like a strange color made from unfamiliar material as well. Now, the farmers attempted to communicate with the children, asking who they were, where were they from, if they were all right, but as the frightened children tried to, when they spoke, no one could understand their speech because the young girl and the boy had, in language which wasn't familiar to the villagers at all. So, unsuccessful with understanding the children, the farmers, took pity on them and brought them to the village, to the home of Sir Richard Decane at Wilkins, and he basically took pity on the children and took them in. Well, after a while, the villagers offered the children like a variety of different kinds of foods, all of which, seemed unfamiliar to them, and they were kind of nervous to eat it, whatever, because it looked bizarre to them. Well,
it said that for days they just didn't eat anything.
Right, because they offered them bread and all these different kind of grains and whatnot of what they had. Well, however, when they were showing some beanstalks, that's when they kind of made gestures to them, asking them to bring it over. And when they brought over the beanstalks to them, they tried to open the stalks to get at the beans, but instead of opening the bean pods, the children attempted to open the stalks themselves, as if that's what they were accustomed to, opening the stalks where they were from.
Right.
Well, they didn't get anything after they opened the stalks, so they were like crying, and the villagers had to show them, hey, you got to open up these bean pods in order to get the peas out of it. Well, once they learned that, that's all they ate for like a long time. And I guess the boy, this is what they're saying. Unfortunately, after coming into this new world and stuff, the boy was was depressed the whole time, and didn't really eat a lot, so he grew weaker and everything, and eventually succumbed to certain illnesses, so he died. But the young girl, she adjusted, very well to her new surroundings, and eventually she began to eat all their food, and she lost her green coloring. She also became baptized, and she took on the name of Agnes Barr. And in fact, she eventually grew into a mature woman and later married a gentleman from a nearby town of King's Lynn. as time passed on, her husband patiently instructed her, with the complexity of the English language, and soon she was able to communicate fairly well. And that's when she told the story of where her and her brother had come from. And she explained to her husband and who else was around of how they, where they came from and how they came to be here. And she basically told him that her people all had like similar skin to hers. Well, before it was the green olive skin color. And she, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Say what
she
you're gonna say.
claimed to be from a place called St. Martin's Land, which
Right.
was
Well,
an
that's what I was gonna
underground
say.
society.
Right, I was going to get to that part, but she was...
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. But no, she was telling him that everybody from her world had exactly the same green color skin that she had, and that she came from like underworld, a subterranean country of enormous size, in the country which went by the name of St. Martin's Land, like Judith said, and the land in which she lived was described as a twilight in nature. Now she said there was like large underground river, on the other side of which there was another land more brightly lit. Now she said one day she and her brother were herding some type of underground animal in like some type of field underground, and they heard some type of bell sounds emerging from one of the cave passages. So her and her brother got interested, so they decided to go check it out. Well, while they were following the sounds upwards through the tunnel, that's when they broke through to the other side, and it was basically extremely bright, and the temperature was different and everything else, and they were in the the British countryside, and they kind of got blinded by the light and stuff, and they were trying to find find their way back down, and that's when the farmers and the villagers kind of stumbled upon them and then took them back to the village with them. Now there is also another story that was mentioned that was kind of similar to the Woolpit story, and it came from the Banjo, Spain in August of 1887, which was like, they said it came out about 100 years after the incident in Woolpit. And it goes like, this is how this story goes from Spain. It says, a green boy and girl with almond-shaped eyes were found in a cave near Banjo, Spain in 1887. They too wouldn't eat and didn't speak the language. The boy died soon after, but the girl soon learned how to eat and survived just like the first story, but eventually she died off. She didn't live off like the one from Woolpit did. Now, it's kind of like basically the same thing, except for in this story, they explained that they ended up in a cave by entering a vortex and being swept up into a wind tunnel. That's the only little bit of a difference when it came to those two stories. So
I read that, and that story from Spain actually was written later.
Later, that's why I think it was kind of
quite
like
a few
tidbit of
years
it.
later, as a matter of
100
fact.
years.
And researchers have not been able to locate the town of Banjo, Spain.
Right.
These two, this whole story to me sounds like an urban legend. I mean, they go into a cave, they come out on the other side, and they're in a new land.
And they lived in subterranean.
It's almost like the land time forgot, or they came from it, whichever. But the reason you talked about, during the 17th century, these towns in England were actually, they came under the rule of, well, besides the King of England, each county came under the rule of the local abbey. And this town came under the rule of the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds. And it was also one of the most densely populated areas in rural England. And I find it interesting that these two people, Ralph of Cogshell and William of Newburgh, one was an abbot and one was a canon, which basically they were both holy men. And they were miles apart when they're telling their stories. And their stories really don't match. The only thing that both of these guys agreed upon was the fact that all these children ate were beans.
Well, that beginning. And they were both had a green colored skin as well.
And they agreed that they both had green colored skin.
And that they were found at the pits or wandered out of the pits. Yeah.
That's the only thing that really is the same in their stories. And we're talking about, two guys that are basically 70 miles apart, one in one direction, one in the other. but the story was taken as truth. And to me, it just has a ring of urban legend to it.
Well, right, but if you think about it, I mean, back then, they could have had green skin because of, you know, dietary issues. You know, if all they ever
That's
ate,
true.
if all you ever ate was nothing but green stuff, kind of like, what was that singer from that family band show? All she ate and drank was carrots, and her skin turned orange. You know,
Well, your skin, there is a medical condition that where your skin will turn green. I can't remember what it is right off the top of my head. I knew it earlier today. But if you don't get the right nutrition, your skin will get a green tint to it. But I mean, not as green as these kids. But then again, you got to think if the story's real, these kids were raised underground. They got no sunlight. So their skin, I mean, it's quite possible was a different color.
no, there was sunlight because when they were talking about it was like it's an underground world, you know, and it had its
Hmm.
own. It was like it had its own luscious green land, rivers, lakes. You know, it's just like above ground, but it was underground in subterranean levels, and they had their own sunlight, which was basically constant. It didn't ever stop, so it was always there. And they also talked about these kids when they did run into them that they had different type of clothing, and this is stated in the several three different versions, the three different chronicles, or the people who wrote the different things sharing it in town. They all described exactly the saying they had like metallic or shiny type of silver material clothing, which they didn't have that kind of stuff back then. So that's another oddity that went with them, you know. And the way that she explained where they were from and what it was like. And it says that she lived and she married a guy and then they had offspring and everything else. And there's somewhere online that they were tracing like so-and-so person is their offspring, you know. And you can look it up. Her name was Agnes Barr and she married someone from King's Lynn's.
I think the man that she married, his name was Richard Barr, and um,
A knight,
he was
some type of knight.
something like
Hood.
that, a knight or something. He had some sort of royal title,
Right.
so she didn't really do too bad for herself. Um, but what? But according to the story I read, she was a servant in the home of Sir Richard de Conge of Wix.
Wait, wasn't he
And
the one that took them in the first place?
he was the one that took them in the first place. And after the brother died, after he was baptized, he became sick
Right, and
and he
died
died.
after. Right. But it's also
And
because they didn't well, they were there for a while and they didn't eat for like a long time because all they were offered was this bizarre food that they knew nothing about, but they after a while when they started to see the greens and stuff that they were normal to see, then that's what they started eating all of the vegetables and veggie type of things, and then slowly the girl started to progress to further her diet into their diet, and that's
you
how
know,
she
as
can
she
healthy.
started eating more and more foods, the green color of her skin just faded away,
Slowly,
and
yeah.
eventually she appeared normal. But these, like I said, these two guys, they're writing this book. I guess it was called a book back then, or whatever it was
It
called,
was like well, they're
and
chronically
telling two completely chronicling it. Thank you. And they were basically telling two different stories. That's like
to a degree, but not really, because I read the three of theirs, and their stories basically all matched up. It's the one that was different was the one in Spain, but I think that came like what we said 100 years later,
well,
and
Ralph of
that's more of
Coxhill
a
said that she was a woman of loose morals and wanton.
right. But that could be due to the fact that they already had a wild side to them in the first place when they were supposedly coming from a different world and becoming accustomed to this new world and the way that they lived there. So she probably didn't live the way that most would expect a woman who married that type of man's to behave, you know?
Well, that's probably true. I mean, after all, they did come from this strange place, and their behavior was probably so different that from these proper English people
Right.
that it wasn't very fit behavior.
Right, and I was kind of researching this, checking it out, because I heard it one time, and I thought, this is kind of interesting. And a lot of people don't really have too much on it. It's like they do a 2-minute tidbit on it. That's all you get to see on YouTube or whatever. And I'm just like, well, I want to know more. I kind of want to find out more. So I was kind of, reading about this or whatever. And it kind of goes with a little bit of one of our topics we're going to do down the road or whatever, when it's the Earth Hollow kind of topic. We were talking about doing that one time. But, people are always talking about, are there subterranean civilizations or life inside the planet Earth, And as I, like I said, I was digging around and stuff with this story. I kind of came across something odd that matches this story, but it's from not like the 40s. So basically, in February of this is what I read, and I thought it was kind of interesting because this guy explains what this woman explained back in the 12th century. Now, in February of 1947, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, leading United States Navy Task Force expedition, flew for 7 hours beyond the North Pole and reached a place never recorded in history before. Now, they proceeded to penetrate the whole region of the Earth, which was about 1,700 miles. There he found a land that was green and lush with growing plants, flowers, and thick forest. 9 years later, on January 13th of 1956, the same Rear Admiral Byrd, leading another official expedition to the Antarctica, flew from his base and went from there to the South Pole and entered the hollow region again of the Earth near the South Pole for 2,300 miles. And then on March 13th, I'll explain this a little bit more. I'm just reading the date parts that they had listed. And on March 13th of 1956, Admiral Byrd returned to the United States and said, "The present expedition has opened up a vast new land. These explorations were divulged on the radio at that time, having worldwide significance." That means people heard about this. So it was on the radio, and the guy that was writing this even said he himself, as a kid, heard this on the radio. And it said the U.S. government decided to strictly censor the information and prevent any more circulation of it. And no additional details were given, and the reports of Rear Admiral Byrd were forgotten. Now, however, when I was kind of reading this stuff up, the key things that they kept talking about, that he talked about on his in his notes in the expedition and the government paperwork, it said that the Earth has a hollow space in its interior where an entire civilization of people lived, and these people are more like spiritual, and technology is more advanced than what we have here on.
Admiral Byrd wrote all this?
Yeah. It was a government Navy task force that went out to the North Pole and to the South Pole to continue and further investigations and seeing what's out there and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't the only one. There was also another dude, which I was going to come up and tell you in a second. But the way that they were describing the things that he said, because they journal and write all their stuff that they see, they document, it's all government stuff, the people. And you guys, they can go and look this up. But it said, within the hollow part of the Earth, there is a central sun which shines constantly, like I said, that girl said. What means daytime all the time. There is no night. There is no ice. It said the heat of this sun is what contributes to the warm Arctic winds on the surface that seem inexplicable to explorers and scientists. It says the climate of the Earth's inner world is subtropical with tons of vegetation growing, and there are lakes with warm water. And he also put that people living there sometimes leave the inner Earth and travel beyond our planet, and they have the technology to come and go undetected. And he also stated this hollow area is at least 6,000 miles or more in diameter. Now, Admiral Byrd was not alone in these discoveries. There was other U.S. Navy commanders, such as Lieutenant Commander David Bonger in 1947, were making the same explorations and findings of these lands beyond the North and the South Pole, and the information was concealed as top secret. A newspaper in Toronto, Canada, published pictures taken from the air showing these valleys with the gentle slopes, because there's like this huge crater on both the North and South Pole area, and they took pictures of it and they published it. And I guess it's like, we already know that people are always talking, there's people out there that are talking about, if the Earth is hollow and there's subterranean civilizations.
Well, there was a time.
But I thought it was really strange that, I'm looking up this Woolpit stuff, and the way that girl explained you know, where she was from and everything. And then I go and find these, you know, Navy stuff where they're explaining exactly the same thing, you know. I just thought it was a little interesting.
Well, that explains warmer globing and why the icebergs are melting.
That doesn't exist, but yeah. No, I'm just saying, I thought it was really interesting the fact that these, you know, Navy expeditions and stuff, and they have these in government paper
I know.
stuff,
I'd
and they're
never seen.
actually
I'd never
explaining the
seen
same
that.
thing.
I find that fascinating. I really do, because this is the first time I've heard of that, and I know who Admiral Byrd is. But there was a time, what was it, back in the 60s, when there was a rash of UFO sightings, and people at that time thought that they were coming from the middle of the earth.
Right. Well, there's also
And
people
that
who believe that they came from the
exit,
ocean, yeah.
and that there was an entrances at the North Pole and the South Pole.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically goes with that.
Right. Well, there's actually a lot of books out there. I don't have them at hand or whatever. Like I said, I just kind of stumbled on this before the show. And, I mean, there's some scientists who have explained the existence of the central sun within the Earth, and they even built, like, a working model of the hollow Earth and patented it. So this stuff's out there. People can go look it up and find out. But, I mean, our show wasn't about, like, subterranean civilizations and let's talk about the hollow Earth. That's totally going to be another topic show. But the fact that I was trying to look up more on this Woolpit stuff and to find out it's a fact, how long has it been around and all this stuff. And the fact that she explained the same type of underground planet, you know,
Underground
Earth.
Civilization.
Yeah, and how it looked and everything.
Basically.
And then these, you know, U.S. Navy men do the exact same thing, and it's documented and everything. And it wasn't just one guy, it was another guy as well. And there's several scientists. And they're actually, when again, I think it was in 2004, a bunch of them headed out there again. I couldn't finish up the documentation because, you know, I found it towards the end of tonight before we were getting on the show. So, but I just thought that was kind of bizarre that somebody else is explaining the same type of subterranean land.
Well, this story about the Green Children,
right,
has inspired several novels. One came out in 1933. I can't remember the name of the author right off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
But the name of his novel was The Green Child. There was a movie out in the 1950s called The Boy with the Green Hair.
Oh, yeah. But didn't he used to have normal hair and then it turned green?
I'm not sure. It's been years since I've seen that movie. I love watching old movies, and it's been a while since I've seen that.
Right.
And then a movie like, and I'm sure that we all have seen or at least heard of the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth. Well, the original one, back in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, these people were, this explorer or scientist or whoever he was, and these people were going to find the center of the Earth, and they entered through the North Pole.
Yeah, that's what they were talking about. There's a huge.
So it has inspired several books and movies.
Right, but the fact that, I mean, people are, there's, like I said, this isn't mainly that's not really our show topic tonight. We just kind of brought it up because it matched kind of what the Woolpit girl talked about and where she came from. So that's why I kind of mentioned it. And I thought it was really odd. And then, well, of course, it's something I'm going to keep exploring. We'll probably bring it up later at some point when we do a topic on, you know, is there subterranean civilizations? Is the Earth really hollow and whatnot? But, I mean, people have really gone out and did a lot of researching and stuff like that. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that a real Navy, admiral had journaled and has government document papers talking about a subterranean land that matches this urban legend type thing from England from the 12th century, you know?
I just
It's weird.
I know, and I find it hard to believe that it actually happened because it sounds more like urban legend to me, but both these men,
high-ranking
William
officers.
of Newburgh and Ralph of
those guys, yeah.
wherever he's from, they both say that they got the story from like William of Newburgh said that he got the story from reliable sources, while Richard Cogswell said that he got the story from
He got the
Sir
story. I think he got this.
Sir Richard de Carn.
Well, right, because he
Whatever.
was hanging out with him actually, and he said he got the story straight from the girl's mouth, which she goes by
Right.
Agnes.
But Ralph of Coggeshall,
Yeah.
I'll get this out in a minute. I'm having trouble talking tonight. He claimed his account came from Sir Richard de Carn, because he was the one that gave them shelter
Right.
in
He
his
took
manor.
he took compassion and took them in and
Right. So
raised
these
them and
guys are.
stuff.
So he's the one that says that he was the one saying that his version of the story was absolutely true, because basically it came right from the horse's mouth.
Well, that's what he's saying. He got it from Sir Richard, as well as the green. I don't know if you want to call her the green girl. You know what I mean? And she told him the story. She wrote and he wrote it out. And because basically what they do is they're recording history stuff. So
Right.
there's 3 people actually, because there was the Jarvis of Tilbury, and then the other 2 guys that you've been talking about, William of Newbury and Ralph of Coggeshall. So there's a couple of people that were recording the history, but then again you have those people 100 years later almost spouting off the same story of these 2 other green children in Spain appearing out, except for they had almond-shaped eyes, which it's weird that they say almond-shaped eyes, because then it makes me think of the black-eyed children or the black-eyed people. They always had the almond-shaped eyes too.
Right.
And there's theories of people are saying, okay, these are just malnourished children who got lost, and they're, came from a time period where Henry the First or Second or whatever it was, killing off these people, and these people fled to the forest, and maybe that's why they lived in a land that was, all green or whatnot, and maybe they just dined on vegetation, therefore they got these, deficiencies in their body, and it's why their skin turned green, kind of like that one, what was that? The Partridge Family. What was that girl's name? She had, the blondish red hair. All she ate was carrots and drank juice, and she turned orange.
Susan Day.
Yeah, Susan Day. That's who I was talking about. So it's possible.
Can't believe I knew her name.
It's possible for that to happen to your body. So people are saying, okay, this is what happened. Then they must have heard the sounds of the farmers, reaping the fields and stuff. So they found their way out, and then that's when they took them in, and they could have been from a different area, thus having a different language that the villagers didn't quite recognize. And they also state that people are saying, well, maybe they're from outer space and they got, accidentally, it's kind of, I don't mean to laugh, but transported here, and thus why they had green skin and the silver metallic outfits.
Well, also at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I think England was at war with the Sextons.
Yeah.
And some people believe that that's who these children were from. They somehow wandered away from their village or whatever. But back then, people would recognize the language and the clothing that the Sextons wore.
Right. So that
But
kind of
these peop-
debunks
Yeah,
that.
so these people are, and at that time, royalty traveled all over.
Right.
I mean, even during the 17th century, they knew French, they knew German, they knew several languages, because they dealt with the royalty from these countries.
Right.
And they, spoke their language.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody knew what language these children were speaking.
Right. And they didn't even recognize the type of material clothing that they wore, and it's the fact that it's a shiny type of metallic type of material seems a little odd to me in general as well.
Yeah, really.
But then they also say that then the other theory is kind of like what we're talking about, is that they were someone from inside the earth. They lived in a subterranean civilization, and they came up through somehow
I can
some
believe
tunnel.
I can believe they probably maybe lived in a cave. But I just have trouble. I'm sorry, I just have trouble believing that the earth is hollow.
Well,
And there are people living in there.
but what if I'm just throwing this out for
Oh, I know.
words don't mean nothing, because that's what me and you, we just kind of banter back and forth and throw out ideas And just because we say something doesn't mean that we 100% believe in it. We're just kind of bantering back and forth, different thoughts. But, I mean, our whole life we were told A, B's, you know, everything is this way and this is what it is, period. But we don't see it. Nobody else has seen it. So therefore it's fact. I mean, that's the same thing. Well, how do, you know, maybe, I'm just throwing this, maybe the whole earth isn't, you know, some big hot molten thing. And there is certain levels of the earth that is hollow. And there are people or, you know, aliens or whatever you want to say living down there, you know?
I find it fascinating that the government had this documented.
There's several things documented. Well, it's not just this, but like I said, this is going into a whole different topic that we're going to do a show on at a different date, you know, but there's also saying that there's civilization under the sea, and that's why people are always seeing spacecrafts and things coming from that. But like I said, this is totally a different show episode that we're going to talk about. But the fact is that these are the theories that people were saying where these kids came from. And this is their ideas, you know. But is it possible that, you know, somebody, you know, these villagers stumbled on two disorientated, scared little children out in the wolf pits?
I believe it's possible.
Did they have discolored skin? It's totally possible. They had different skin diseases and whatnot. Did they have a different language or a language they didn't understand? Yeah. I mean, there's kids in Russia that were abandoned and tossed out, and they were raised by wolves, and they didn't speak the language or anything, and they learned to speak, you know, with the wolves and everything else. So maybe these kids were abandoned in the woods their whole life, practically, and they created their own language, thus why the villagers didn't understand.
That's kind of on the line of what I was thinking. I was thinking that it was probably a language that this brother and sister
created,
kind of developed and created between themselves so they could communicate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's entirely possible. They did live in a cave.
Yeah, but they didn't. They didn't live in a cave. They didn't say they lived in the cave. They said they came up through a tunnel. They came to a cave entrance from their land because they heard bells, a faint sound of bells, and they were curious to what this was. So they followed the tunnel, or went into the cave and followed up. And
they got lost.
And no, well, they said they felt like they were traveling for days, but, you know, nobody knows if their time was the same as our time, you know. And it took them a few days or whatnot to find their way up, and then finally busted through. Well, it was completely bright here, and it's a different temperature and everything, so it kind of disorientated them, and they kind of got stumbled around, and they were and got scared, and they were trying to find out where they just came out of. In the wolf pit entrance, and that's when the villagers stumbled on them and then just kind of bombarded them like, hey, you know. And so I'm sure that freaked them out too.
There are vortexes all over the world. You think maybe they could have stumbled into a vortex? Maybe they were, I don't know, time travelers or something. They stumbled into
I was just going to say, I think there's one in my house because my items seem to disappear all the time, even though I know where I put them. Something's always taking something.
I got 3 little vortexes running around here that...
yeah, your kids.
Misplace items.
Misplace and borrow.
I don't know. Did they stumble into a vortex and get transported to this place?
Right, and that's kind of like...
They seem so much more... 17th century was primitive. I mean, at the time, those people thought, you know, they're living in the modern times, but 17th century was primitive.
So we're told.
And apparently these children came from a place that was even more primitive than that.
So well, I don't know if they came from a place that was, you know, more than that. I mean, we're kind of limited in what we're kind of finding. It'd be interesting to actually read the supposedly original text that was written by these, you know, chroniclers who, you know, write down all the history of back then. But, I mean, we're told...
And that was the thing, too. Yeah. Back then, you had people that actually did record the history of the time.
Well, they decided that this, you know, is going to play important to something at some point later on in the future, which it does, you know. But the point is, we don't know 100% the technology and the things that they were going through back then. We're only told, like, hey, this is how it was because we're told certain things and we're just left to believe, you know. So I don't really know 100% how everything was back then. We can only go off of what we're told and what we're taught. But I just think that it was kind of interesting that they also named St. Martin's Land. Well, there was a St. Martin's that was also in England, you know? So maybe they were from that town. Their parents ditched them. They ended up surviving in the woods for a long time and, you know, created their own language as well, as like we said.
Or there was a war going on at the time, too. They could have been left orphans at some point and just kind of were left to their own devices, so to speak.
Right.
And maybe they lived in the woods or lived in a cave or someplace like that. And it's like we mentioned before, it was probably a language they made up together that they created so they could communicate with each other.
Right. And that's just a theory that we're throwing out. But the fact is that they're both, you know, they both didn't because he died. But she's explaining where she came from. There was sun 24/7 down there, that it had a huge river and they had valleys and everything was lush and green. And they also were, it's just like they were doing underground living, just as what we were doing up here on the, or not me and you, but the people were doing on top of the surface as well, except for they were living in basically two different worlds, which is kind of bizarre. But they did talk about it in the Spain one, where they said that the girl and the boy both mentioned that how they ended up in the cave is because they entered like some type of vortex, and they were being swept up into some type of wind tunnel that shot them out into the British countryside. And then they were kind of stumbling, or not the British countryside, in Spain. And that's when they were, you know, found by the Spaniards, you know? It's bizarre. All of it's bizarre, and it makes you think, no way, right?
I know. I have trouble just even imagining this, because I cannot imagine an entire civilization underground. And according to the chroniclers, that's what this woman told. Of course, you got two guys, well, you say three, I didn't know about the third one, but at least these two guys telling the story on these children. And except for some places where they do agree, they basically, the stories are different.
Not really different. They're basically the same, except for one's in North Folk and one was in South Folk, but both near the Woolpit area.
Yeah.
So it's not as different as you're saying, because I've read all of theirs too. There's 3 of them that I read that are basically the same. The only one that's different is the Spain one. But the fact that I'm sitting here researching this stuff and I stumble on, you know, Navy admiral, you know, an admiral and a commander and a couple other people who are a part of the United States Navy Task Force, who had several expeditions to the North Pole and the South Pole, and both have documented papers in the 50s and the 40s. And they were actually on the radio telling this, and there's people who are alive to this day who had heard that radio broadcast.
And the fact that the government classified the papers as top secret.
Well, the government classifies a lot of stuff that they don't want people knowing about.
You know, if they don't want the American population to know anything, then it's classified top secret. I just find it very interesting that Admiral Byrd
Richard
made
E.
this
Byrd.
report.
Yep. He went several times. He went in 47.
I know.
In the 56 in January, and also part of March, where they, one was to the North Pole, and they had entered in this huge, because they went past the North Pole for about like 7 more hours, and that's when they discovered this huge hole. Well, in the huge hole, when they swished down and went about 1,700 miles, that's when they found this lush green land with you know, flowers and thick forests and everything. And we're talking about the North Pole.
And how did they get in the hole? I mean,
they flew down. They flew down in there. That's what they were talking about. I don't know. I'm just reading the papers that are out there, and everybody can go and look it up.
You know, it just popped into my mind. Oh my God, did they have planes in the 40s? Yeah, they did.
Shoot.
Son of a gun.
They used hot air balloons. That'd be one chilly and long.
I don't even know if they could keep a hot air balloon inflated at the North Pole.
I know, but I'm just saying that's when they found this huge crevice. But the funny thing is there are people...
And it was big enough for a plane to go in.
It's huge. Well,
that's
actually,
amazing.
It's ginormous, actually. And there's also another one on the South Pole as well. And they were talking about meeting these an entire different civilization of people who live down there, and they're far more spiritually and technology advanced than those of us living on the surface, and that they're continually, going back and forth from living inside the earth and traveling beyond our planet to other planets, So, and they've been, and it's stated that they've been living down in the middle of the earth far before we even had a civilization on top of the earth. This is supposedly all these things are written up, and they did have it on the radio, and they were talking about all of this, and that's when the government decided to shut it down, because of course the government's going to go explore this more or do whatever, and they don't want, the rest of us to find out if it is or what it is. You know what I mean? So,
right.
But like I said, that's a whole different topic. But they do have, I guess, tons of other scientists and all these other people who are constantly going back out to the North and the South Pole, exploring these huge entrances to certain parts of the earth that bring you to different lands, and they're also talking about subterranean civilizations that are living under the ocean. So I don't know.
Well,
it's
like
weird.
I said before, I mean, like the story in Spain where they entered a vortex. I don't know of any vortex. I mean, there are vortexes all over the world.
Right.
And I do believe that spirits
that.
come through them, but I've never heard of anybody entering a flesh and blood entering a vortex and being transported to another world.
Well, they also, and I know this is getting off topic a little bit, but they also mentioned that Bigfoot is from a parallel dimension or from, somewhere else, and that they just pop in and out too, or some of these odd creatures that people are always seeing, like the werewolf creatures as well. That's why they're not finding their places on the planet, their dens, this, that, and everything else. So there's people always talking about these different things and running into things saying that they're from this or from there. So I don't know. Is it true? I don't know. Is it bizarre?
I don't know.
Yes, very bizarre. But the fact that I ran into this stuff tonight about Admiral Richard Byrd saying that he's gone to the North Pole and to the South Pole and entered into these inner Earth, I don't even know what you call it. I'm gonna go research it more and we're gonna have to do a show on it, because I really want to find out what is this all about.
Well, I knew Admiral Byrd went to the North Pole with a ship, but I didn't know they went up there with planes.
I don't know.
And I just find it hard to believe that the Earth is hollow on the inside and there's people living in there. I just.
Yeah, but you know how many?
I just don't buy it. I just absolutely do not buy it.
But what about Mary King's Close? They built a subterranean type of village underground. There's other underground cities as well in Russia and other areas where these people live deep under the ground.
That's kind of a different deal. They're digging their way into these places. They're creating these places. For a place to live. And places like Mary King's Close was basically a tenement.
Right. I mean, we're not saying the things we're spouting off are like, you guys must believe, and drink the Kool-Aid or nothing. It's just like me and you stumble on something. We say, hey, this is interesting. Let's talk about it with our friends and whoever joins in and listens to our show. And then we ever notice is like when we start to research this thing, it brings us down another web to this, and it's almost like so many different things are connected, and it's just bizarre, because then you start to get into time travel, then we end up getting into different dimensions, and then we end up getting into there's things that live under the earth and there's things that live under the ocean, and all we were doing was like studying something like JFK or something, you know what I mean? It's just weird, all these different connections.
The thing of it is, though, the story of the Green Children of Woolpit, it is connected to several things.
It is.
Okay, it's connected to the chroniclers.
Yep, which
it's
is out there for people to find.
Research. There have been people that have actually researched this
through
the ages. There were books written that basically used the same scenario. There have been movies made that have used the same scenario, and they all go back and they all can be connected to this particular story of these children in Suffolk County, England.
Yeah, near Edmonds, St. Edmunds or whatever it was.
Bury of St. Edmunds.
Yeah, that's like the largest village near Woolpit. And the reason why, Woolpit took on its name is because of those trenches and pits. And those things were around way before the village really kind of started. So nobody really knows where it came from or really how long it was there. They just kept saying that it was extremely ancient. So they kind of just left it alone and just didn't do anything with it. And then the fact that these children come from this ancient, bizarre section of the town, So that's why they have this sign. The sign that I have up is actually the sign they have in Woolpit. And they have a museum and they have all this more information out there about this story and everything else. So if whoever wants to go travel, pop over in Woolpit in England and, investigate it and go even see the Woolpit section where supposedly the children came from.
But you're right though. I mean, the town was, and this was at the time, it was the most densely populated area of England. And Woolpit did build. It was a village that kind of built up around these pits because there were people paid to capture these animals that were going in and stealing and eating sheep and other people and stuff. So they dug all these pits to trap these animals, and the village basically grew up around it.
Right.
But the town itself, Bury of Edmonton, was actually the most densely populated area in rural England. So it would be possible for these two kids to kind of get lost in the shuffle, and maybe something happened that left them orphans and they kind of wandered off into the woods and raised themselves. Because there's stories that come out of Russia, Germany, England, and even Scotland and other countries where something like this has happened, where they have found people that were raised by animals or raised themselves and they acted like animals. So it's, that could be entirely possible.
Right. I guess some of the people in chat are saying that the show's kind of cutting in and out for them. I don't know. I'm not showing any issues. I'm showing that everything's perfect and green. So if anybody in chat want to text and let us know if everybody's having problems or just a couple of people. Because everything that shows fine on my levels. So maybe try everybody refreshing or something.
I hear you.
Yeah, I hear you too. And everything on player's running fine. Everything's going fine.
Penny says that she has no show going on her end.
Well, everything's running fine, so I don't know what to tell people. I guess all they can do is refresh because...
Yeah, maybe if you try refreshing, maybe that'll help. Sometimes it does.
Right. Maybe it's just the website was...
And sometimes Skype has issues too.
Well, it's all good here. Jason says it's all good, so maybe those guys just need to refresh right quick and see if it fixes it. Everything on my end's great, and on your end's great too. So it could just be some glitch. It happens to people sometimes. But like I'm saying, and it's not just the Woolpit stuff that are talking about Green Children. There's other people, I guess, down in Spain were talking about that, but it could have been the same story. But the fact that now I'm researching later on, and it came out in the 40s and the 50s, that they were talking about similar subterranean land, it makes you start to wonder, is there some sort of truth to some of all of this? And that's why I'm going to go and research it a little bit more to find out. I mean, I was just going off of the Woolpit story because it's kind of like a Halloween-ish thing. Let's tell some odd legend type of thing. But now that there's more facts with more governmental things in it, it makes you want to kind of explore it a little bit more. So I'll kind of have to see how this goes and let you know and see if we end up doing a show on the Hollow Earth,
Well, it would be an interesting topic to research.
Oh, it is. It's kind of...
Jason wants his money back because he said the show just cut out on him too.
Well, I don't know. Being that it's a free show...
No refunds. You pay your cover charge. You just get stuck with what you got.
Right. And we just show pictures. We don't do live video of each other. We just do Skype, show photos, and whatever the show is on that night. We don't have webcams or nothing. It's just a talk show on the internet. So, but yeah, that's my kind of thing that I found out, and I thought it was kind of an interesting story, so I kind of want to talk about it. And you know, is it true? Is it not true? I don't know. That's for our listeners to decide. You know.
Yes, it is, and it's actually a very interesting story. And now that you brought Admiral Byrd into the picture,
you're going to start researching too, right?
I'm going to start digging into it a little deeper, because I'm finding that really bizarre.
Well, I wouldn't even, it's not just Admiral Byrd. It was also David Bunger. He was a commander and lieutenant, but it's not just those guys. There was, I guess, a few other people that have been doing trips to the South Pole and to the North Pole.
Well, Admiral Byrd was a very, very respected explorer of his time. And
oh,
basically,
yeah.
That's what he was an explorer.
Right, totally.
And he, while he was connected to the military, the United States Navy, he basically was an explorer and very respected of his time. And he did go to the North Pole more than once. I don't know how many times he was at the South Pole. I only read about one time going there. So there's no
yes.
I lost my train of thought.
It happens.
It happens.
We're not experts. We're not experts. We just like to come on and banter about different topics and everything else and what have you. And we also
basically what we like to do is, well, Raven and I, we Skype quite often, and we talk about a variety of things.
Yeah,
we'll talk about anything and everything that pops into our head or catches our attention.
Right.
And we have always done that. So we basically created this place so people could listen to our stories and our banter,
and also call in.
Have a nice place to come and chat with other people.
Right, and we also have paranormal talk nights and other nights where we invite our listeners to come and share their evidence, stories, and what have you with us too, you know, which we're going to do next week, right?
Right.
A Halloween topic, and invite viewers to call in during the second half, making it like an open forum as well.
Right.
So, yeah, that's about it that I have for the Woolpit thing, you know, but now that I found that there's more people talking about the same type of environment and land under the earth, I'm going to be researching that. But what do you think about taking a kind of a little early, quick intermission and then come back and do, I just forgot what we were doing. Mary King's Close. Yeah, we're going to take like a quick 3-minute break so everybody can, you know, stand up, get some water, go to the bathroom, get a snack. You know,
smoke them if you got them.
Well, I don't promote smoking, but if that's what you do, you do. And for those of you listening over at our Ustream site, if you want, you can scroll down and find the link to our website, and you can join in with our amazing chatters here tonight and like us on Facebook, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. welcome back to Anything But Ordinary. I'm your host, Raven, and here is your other awesome host, Spooky.
Well, thank you for
saying you're
acknowledging my awesomeness.
I know, it's overpowering sometimes.
Oh, I know.
No, just kidding.
Welcome back
to the second half. We talk about Mary King's clothes.
We're going to discuss Mary King's clothes. This is
one of your topics.
This is a place I'm interested in. Ever since I saw it on one of the ghost shows.
Yeah.
I just got interested in this particular thing. I just thought it was fascinating that there was an underground city underneath Edinburgh, Scotland. And I just thought it was kind of bizarre, too, that people lived underground. But come to find out, Mary King's clothes actually started above ground, and it went down 7 stories.
Mm-hmm.
Close, C-L-O-S-E, is actually a Scottish word for alleyway. But Mary King's Close is located in Old Edinburgh, Scotland. It took its name from Mary King, daughter of advocate Alexander King.
Ooh. Yeah.
Who in the 17th century actually owned several properties in the Close. So she was and the Close was one of the busiest areas of Edinburgh at the time, but it was still kind of like a slum.
Mm-hmm.
So she was a slumlord. It's basically an underground tenement. It's approximately 7 stories deep. I can't even imagine going home and going 7 stories into the earth to get to my little room.
I wouldn't even live under the ground. No,
I would.
No offense, but I would.
Either.
Yeah, no way.
It consisted. I can't even imagine that, and I'm claustrophobic, and that not very bad, but that would really get to me. I think I would go nuts.
I would picture bugs on me, you know.
I know. Ooh. But
that's why I don't like, you know, how people have like those the houses are undergroundish, part of it is, and the other half's exposed.
Yeah.
And my relative had one of those, and they stuck me in the back room where it was underground, and I just the whole night I couldn't, because I was a little kid, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that worms and bugs were gonna bust through the wall and just take me over. So I'm like, yeah, not for me. But anyway, go on.
It consisted of winding streets with tenements on both sides. And life in the 17th century, in Mary King's Close in the 17th century, was less than sanitary.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they didn't have a proper sewer system. And at that time, they did have sewer systems. But the Close didn't have a proper sewage system. So the tenants would just simply dump their wastewater into the streets.
Oh, talk about danger.
I know, and these streets,
cesspool of icky.
They winded down. So
I mean, so you're at the bottom. You're kind of like
at the bottom. You're
effed. The letter effed.
You're screwed.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to not say a whole word, but yes, basically. You're like, I'm going to live down here. And then as time goes by, guess what's in your room every day?
And really.
But didn't they have like up to 12 or 15 people living in one small room anyway? That's what I kind of heard.
I don't really know. There were some rooms that entire families lived in.
Right.
So I would imagine they did. Rats ran wild, and they carried fleas throughout the entire Close. And eventually the fleas became infected with the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is the bubonic plague, or as some people called it, the Black Death. And it just spelled disaster for the residents of the Close. I mean, they're all down there, all stuck.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it just basically you would think caves, but actually the rooms were rock. But anyway, when the Black Death first appeared, in the British Isles, it seemed to be just a problem just in the English territories, but unfortunately it did make its way to Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Scotland lost a quarter of its population at this time, And in the tight quarters of the Mary King close, it was particularly devastating. I mean, these people were just close.
Yeah,
A
that's just.
persistent myth that went around
Hmm.
through the years and through the ages was that in an effort to quarantine victims, Edinburgh city officials just sealed off Mary King's close in 1644, trying to contain the plague,
And just trap the
leaving,
people down in there.
yeah, and well, they trapped approximately 600 people to perish without hope. But in reality, the plague victims were actually well cared for, and the town officials did manage the outbreak efficiently and compassionately. And families that were healthy enough to be moved were moved to Bergmuir. And then those that weren't, they let the workers know by placing white flags or rags in their windows
Hmm.
so food and coal could be delivered to their doorsteps. So actually, they did show compassion for these people. And the doctor that took care of these people, he was known as the plague doctor. It was a Dr. George Ray. He would go into town and he would wear leather from head to toe, and he wore this bizarre bird-shaped mask to protect himself.
Well,
Well, it worked because the fleas were unable to bite him, so he survived the plague.
but didn't they? I think that was like a common thing because they used to stuff certain herbs in the snout section that they could breathe to help protect them from
Right,
viruses.
right,
So it had
exactly.
multiple purposes for it as well,
And
Which
this
was who? Why would
actually,
you design it looking like that though? I'm sorry we don't have a picture for that, but I'm sure if you type up the guy's name, it'll probably show some drawing or sketching of him.
he did it to protect himself,
Yeah, but
to
what
try to keep these germs off. And I don't think at the time that they realized that it was actually the fleas carrying this disease.
wasn't it the
And
rats too though?
well, it was the fleas on the rats. It wasn't the rats that caused the plague. It was the fleas on the rats. But
Oh, what
like
a
I
horrible
said,
thing to get because you got the boils and you got, the pus and all that. And everybody's, stuck in such tight quarters. They can totally see why it spread so
well,
quickly.
it did. I mean, they were in such tight quarters that this just it spread like wildfire through the clothes. And to save a plague victim, Dr. Ray would actually slice off
Dr.
the
Ray.
top of the sores on the victims,
Right?
and he would jam a red hot poker into the wound to
Cauterize it?
cauterize it.
Yeah. I don't
Now,
see how
no
that's.
doubt this was horrible and barbaric, but
And
the
painful.
treat and painful, but the treatment worked. I can't imagine even going through that. I mean, it's bad enough you're living in underground in very close quarters. You got sewage, a wastewater coming down into your home
From the
from the
people,
street.
from the people and the animals. Gloomy had mentioned also, we forgot to mention that they also had animals down there.
Yes, they did. Yes, they
So
sure
thank
did.
you,
They had
Gloomy.
animals down there,
Mm-hmm.
and it just, I mean, it had to have been very horrendous, unsanitary conditions in this place. And
Could
but
you
the thing
imagine
of
the
it was, though,
smell?
the higher level you lived on, the better off you actually
Well,
were,
because you had a
because
little
not
bit more
only
fresher oxygen and air. The further you go down, it's stagnant, nasty, and oh my gosh, I could not live down. I would just move somewhere else. I mean, who decides, hey, I'm going to go live underground? Not for
I
me.
know, but at the time, though, that was probably the solution for them at this time.
Right.
And even after the plague passed, people continued to live in the clothes until the 19th century.
That's right.
And at that time, it was emptied and sealed, and they the part that was above ground, because part of Mary King's clothes was above ground.
Right.
It was they leveled it,
Right.
uh, destroyed the town, and they built the Royal and filled it in, and built the Royal Exchange on top of it. And the clothes was all but forgotten. The only reason that they rediscovered it was because there were workmen digging on the street above, and they accidentally punched in to the winding streets of the close.
When
So
was
they
that?
got,
In the 80s or something?
that was early 20th century.
Oh, okay. So they
That's
kind
when
of
they,
found it, and then they kind of
well, they
what
were kind
reopened
of,
it.
yeah, they were kind of, I don't know, I guess paving the streets or building the streets, but they just went down too deep and they punched through to this cave-like place. And when they got to checking it out and everything, they found that it was an underground city. And of course, according, to historians and stuff, knew what this place was.
See, what I was kind of read on is kind of like what you were talking about. Was like they kind of closed off a bunch of the underground stuff, including Mary King's Close. Well,
Right.
and
And
after
Mary King's Close wasn't the only close in Edinburgh, England,
right,
or
but
Scotland, sorry. But it just happened to be, it was the biggest, and it just happened to be the one that was discovered.
right. Well, but to see, this is a thing that I kind of read up on. I was trying to, catch up on a little bit and see a little bit more of the history. They said that, like you said, they shut up the residents and, left them inside and left them to die of the plague. But by the end of the plague outbreak, they were talking about because Edinburgh's population just kept growing and,
I think
and was getting
Edinburgh today
overcrowded.
is the largest city in Scotland.
Right, and they kept saying it was
It's
still,
also the capital.
yeah, so people just wanted to keep reproducing and it just kept, growing. It was mentioned that they opened up Mary King's Close again and the other streets, and they took out the corpses and encouraged people to move back down in there. And that's when it was
I don't
quickly
know. I didn't
reoccupied.
read that. I know that after what I read was after the plague that people did continue to live down there. I don't know if I'd have been able to or not after going through the Black Death.
Yeah,
The
but I
bubonic
guess
plague.
this was like
But it's
years
probably
later
the only,
on.
yeah, it probably was the only place they had to live too.
But they say that this is years later on. The plague's gone, everything else. The places get overpopulated. They're like, okay, let's reopen this stuff back up. They cleaned it out, and then people started moving back down in there again. That's what I read. So,
I
I
don't
think
really
they
know.
also have like a website.
Today, yeah, they do have an official website.
I think it's
but
called
today it's a
marykingsclose.com, right?
right.
Mm-hmm.
But today it's a popular tourist attraction. They get thousands and thousands of people going through there every single year, and they run tours through there even on Christmas. It's every single day of the year, Monday through Sunday through Saturday, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. Even Christmas Day.
Sunday through Saturday. It's kind of a weird.
Well,
way of
Sunday's
saying
first
it.
day of the week.
I know, but it's kind of a weird way to say it. So basically opened every day.
They're opened every single day
Yes.
of the year, even Christmas. And around Christmas time, they kind of decorate a little bit and show you what Christmas would have been like
Down
in the clothes.
right.
And it does attract those that are interested in the macabre history and the ghost stories. And most of the people that go there go for the ghost stories. And one of the most
Famous ones, yeah.
famous stories was one of a 10-year-old girl named Annie who died of the plague. And people, when they go into Annie's room, they report changes, cold spots, and feeling a strange presence in that room. And people have left toys and dolls and sweets in Annie's room. So this is a very matter of fact, I'd like to go there. I really would. If I had a bucket list, I would put Mary King's Close on my bucket list.
Well, there was this thing that I was kind of reading, and they were saying shortly after the closes were reoccupied, Professor George Sinclair published a book called Satan's Invisible World, and this book was written to encourage the citizens of Edinburgh, to be less sinful and more religious and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the book told the story of Thomas Coulthart and his wife, and they had moved into Mary King's Close and soon, regretted that decision because the previous residents hadn't moved out yet. And they saw an old gray-haired man, a floating child, a disembodied arm, which kept trying to shake hands, which would be weird. Could you imagine just sitting in your room, minding your own business, and some arm comes floating in and wants to shake your hand like repetitively over and over again.
I can't even imagine them trying to reoccupy that place. But
That'd be like, here, let's play ball.
it's had a reputation for hauntings though since the 17th century. Um, one of the reasons one of the theories is about that is that
I hadn't finished
Mary
yet, though.
King's Close ran the nearest to the old Nor Loch,
Right.
which was a stagnant and highly polluted marsh, and it emitted biogas. And biogas is a mixture of gases that are produced by the breakdown of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. But they say that this biogas escaping into the clothes was blamed for the eerie lights seen and may be the cause of the rumors of spirit hauntings. And they also say that these gases can produce hallucinations.
Right. Well, to finish the part up, they kept seeing, and then they started seeing the floating arms by themselves. They also explained that pretty soon all these apparitions were starting to join, and more by random flying dead stuff, until they took up the whole room of where this couple lived and trapped them in their bed. So basically, this book convinced the public that Mary King's Close was a demonic hellhole, and probably had been ever since Catholic Alexander King lived there. And it said, of course, he was in league with the devil, because how else could a Catholic ever get to be a lawyer? That was one of their jokes, you know what I mean? But then at the end
their main religion back then was Catholic.
A big part. I think also Baptist was with
well,
it.
It was basically two religions,
yeah.
Catholic and Protestant.
Or Protestant, that was it. And then they say, like, at the end of the 1600s, some of the houses in Mary King's Close were damaged in fires. And locals took this to be a message from God, although it didn't stop people from living in there, and infected a big parts of the streets. So that was kind of like one of the things I read of how the ghostly stuff started to come into play, is when they all started to move back down in there after it was discovered by
there is no doubt in my mind that the place probably is haunted, because
because of the awful deaths.
There were over 600 people living in this close.
Right.
Over 600.
And
that's a lot of people. And
to be
during the bubonic plague,
right,
Scotland lost or Edinburgh lost 25% of their population. That's a lot of people.
Well, they kept up pretty busy afterwards, from what they were talking about. That's why they had to reopen it up and hope and pray that people would go live down there. But it's disgusting, though. I mean, these people died tragically, and then to be trapped down there as well, I can only imagine the emotional play would do on someone's mind.
That had to have been a miserable existence.
Right.
A miserable existence. I mean, you're living underground. It's dirty. I don't care if there is rock there making the rooms and the it's dirty. It was unsanitary. And like I said, the higher up you lived in this close, the better off you were, because all of this wastewater that everybody was just throwing out in this alleyway, it had to go someplace.
Yeah, the lowest part.
And it went down to the lower parts. And one of the urban legends say that the hauntings originated when plague victims were being quarantined and left to die in the close.
Mm-hmm.
And another one said that their bodies were being used to build the walls. But I just can't imagine.
Well, they do have that underground thing in Paris, the catacombs, where they built up the walls with the dead, because they had nowhere else to put them.
But the catacombs were specifically for burial.
Right, but I think that there was some parts where people lived in at some point. I guess we'll have to do a tidbit of show on that too then, and talk a little bit on that. But I know that they did have, I mean, I can understand them building the wall up from the dead, But the thing is, which is weird, I think wasn't the businesses more up towards the top some of the
Yes, they were,
and then
and
the
that was another thing. They had they had bars and
so
all
all
kinds
that
of
stuff was
places
going down
in the
too.
clothes.
Yeah. So everything that came from the bars and the upper buff stuff kept coming down too. So it
There was a
wasn't
lot
just
of crime in the clothes too.
right. Well, crime, rape, and a lot of just it wasn't a
Murders,
yeah. It wasn't a great place to live.
murder, rape, all kinds of crime going on.
There was no
Uh,
privacy really, if you think about it. It's
no,
like
there
one
wasn't. There
huge,
really wasn't.
ginormous rooms where multiple people are sometimes two families are living in one big giant space. You know.
And basically, the rooms were just big enough maybe for sleeping if you were lucky.
But that one little girl that you had started to talk about, they had mentioned that, you know, those workers who had punched through the hole again after it had been sealed up after a while again, and they punched in and they went down there, they had seen that little girl crying for her mother, and they had felt bad for her. This is one of the stories they talk about. And that they had given, this is in the 80s or something, and they had given, or maybe it was the 80s ones, I can't remember. Anyway, somebody saw her at some point, and they gave her a doll and intended to appease this spirit. And then I guess that's what kind of started the tradition of all the people who come and visit Mary King's Close and Jenny's room to bring her
Annie.
or Annie, whatever, Jenny, Annie.
Who cares?
Well, somebody cares. Okay, I'm not.
Somebody cares.
Somebody does care. So it's not like we don't care. It's just, you know, somebody does care. But that's why they bring her these trinkets, these toys.
Well, they said that they would go in there,
you.
and they never really said anything about seeing her, but they said that they could feel her, and they would go into her room, and there would be, and it would be cold. I mean, they knew when she was present because the entire room would get cold, and they could just feel her presence. I don't know really if anybody saw her or not.
I think I read it at that website of Real Mary King's Close where they were kind of doing tidbits. I believe that's where I read it, where someone had mentioned they did, two guys see her, and that's how it's the tradition of bringing her toys and trinkets started. But I guess there's people who do go here nowadays and do see odd things. So you're saying that it's this...
Well, it's not only Annie's room. There are hauntings, they claim, throughout this entire close. And really, I could see why. I could really see why. There was just so much that went on in there, and it was like a small metropolitan in itself. And it wasn't just the people who lived there that did business there. People came from all over Edinburgh and went down into this close and did business. There were prostitutes there. Like I said, there were bars there. There were stores there.
Well, during the second, I don't remember if you said this or not, but they also said during the Second World War, it was used as an air raid shelter for the city chambers personnel. And that's why a lot of the walls were painted or whitewashed down there and kind of cleaned up and touched up a little bit, you know?
Right. Right. It was used as kind of like a bomb shelter. And it's like I said before, the close used to be, I mean, the top level of the close was above ground. And they just, for some reason, they just started building underneath it. And I don't know if it was a need because of such a dense population and these people needed a place to live. I don't know if it was because...
well, they kind of mentioned it was a little variety of all that.
This was a poor section of town, and they needed a place, you know, to put these people.
Right.
There was really no explanation that I found as to why this place was built. It was just, and it was one of the busiest business sections in Edinburgh. So, but crime did run rampant down there, and actually the people that lived there were kind of most of them were what you would call unsavory.
My kind of people. No, I'm just kidding.
My kind of people.
Not my kind of people. But yeah, it's just like it basically was a variety of things. They needed more space because the city was becoming overpopulated. So that's why they chose to keep digging down and give people more available space to live in Edinburgh.
Edinburgh had to be really, really heavily populated because Mary King's Close was not the only close in Edinburgh. There were two others. I can't remember their names, but they were two smaller ones. Mary King Close just happened to be the largest one.
So the fact that people are still kind of going to here and doing ghost tours and all that, and there's people who are getting EVPs, photos, videos, and odd experiences when they're there. So are you saying that these things probably aren't happening, or are happening?
No, I believe that they are happening. With the history of this place um,
and the tragic deaths that
and the
occurred.
tragic deaths. Thank you. I couldn't get that word out. The tragic, horrible deaths. You know, the bubonic plague was not an easy way to die. That was actually a slow death.
Slow and painful and disgusting.
Slow and very painful.
Disgusting.
And so I can see why this place would be haunted, and it would not surprise me if you went into every room on every level and ran into some sort of spirit.
Wasn't that the plague that happened where that song came from? Pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fell down. Because they burnt the bodies and people used to carry posies and stuff with them in their pockets and everything to cover their mouths just so they didn't have to smell the rotting death of these people. Their flesh was disgusting and decaying away.
I don't know about that.
I think that's what the song originally came from, because it had to do with the plague, the Black Plague, and all that nastiness, and that's where that song kind of comes from. And it's kind of crazy because all these children songs that we grew up singing are really awful songs where they originated from, you know, like London Bridges and Pocket Full of Poesy song. All that stuff is about death and tragic stuff, you know.
Yeah, it is actually. People don't realize where those songs come from or what created them.
But right, I believe that's part of where it came from, is because of the plague, and people were carrying flowers and bringing flowers around just to help with the stench, and then they would put it over their mouths to help them be able to breathe, because there were still people living in the area who were still healthy with the people who had the plague, you know, because you really had nowhere to go.
Well, most of the plague victims were in the clothes. That's where the rats were. The rats ran rampant down there. And anytime that you have unsanitary conditions and you're just throwing food and wastewater and stuff out, you're going to attract the rats. And like I said before, it wasn't the rats that actually caused the plague. It was the fleas on the rats. They would bite they became infected with this bacteria, which is basically what it was. And they would bite people, because that's like, if you got a dog with fleas and you don't know your dog has fleas, you let that dog into your house, those fleas are going to spread out through your home unless you do something about it. And fleas bite. Yeah,
true. But I mean, it's so easy for people, you know, people think, okay, this is not going to happen nowadays or everything else, but some people are kind of privileged and lucky to be living where they're living, to have the conveniences that we do. But if for whatever reason the power gets shut off and never comes back on again, we could be, you know, just like these people, you know, exposed to fleas. We could be
living in caves.
Well, not just caves, but exposed to fleas, and it's very easy to get the same conditions.
Wasn't it about 3 or 4 years ago they found 2 people? I think it was Africa.
I don't know.
Africa, that actually had the bubonic plague.
I'm not sure, so I can't respond 100% on that one, but it's possibility that it could have came from. The story could have came from there.
Because it's not eradicated. They did not get rid of it.
Oh, no.
It can pop up, you know, at any time. That's like this Ebola outbreak. You know, this stuff can pop up at any time.
Oh, right.
And as long as you have fleas, there's always the chance. And as far as I know, everything that I have read, the bubonic plague was spread by fleas. That's how you get it. You get it by a flea biting you that has the bacteria.
But it makes you wonder how stupid, no offense, and I'm not really trying to attack anybody, and I don't want no ghosties to come after me, but, I mean, if the world goes down the tubes and everything gets shut off, and if I'm surrounded with some people who are deciding to just walk out their door and dump their waste right there, that's a hint to move, you know, because you don't eat and dump your waste in the same area, you know? It's just...
No, you don't.
That's just... You're basically choosing to bring down the house on yourself, if you want to. I'm trying to pick nice words without cussing or anything, but it's that I'm like, if I was living,
it makes you wonder just exactly how
dumb they were.
safe. Well, how safe there are still people nowadays that have outhouses. It makes you wonder, what can you catch going out there to go to the bathroom?
Well, nothing. The people who have outhouses, or people who live in Alaska, or the people who are choosing to live off the grid, they actually understand. And just like my great-grandparents understood, they had outhouses. And what you do is you dig a deep hole, like 6 feet or so down, and then you move the building over on top. And then after so long, then you move you dig another hole somewhere else further off, and then you move it over there and you cover up the other one. You know what I mean? People knew how to take care of themselves. But for whatever reason, these people in Edinburgh, down in the close, didn't care or didn't understand the dangers or what have you. I don't understand why they just chose to dump everything right down there. And
well, back then too, they it's like Gloomy said, it was the lack of the outhouses. But
well, how can you have an outhouse in an underground city too? It's kind of hard to
if you think about it, these people went to the bathroom in chamber pots.
Yeah,
and they had to empty the chamber pots.
At some point, supposedly by this time, when they've reached Edinburgh in this century, must have grown to know how to take care of themselves, supposedly from how we were in the past. But obviously, they digressed, or nobody told them, hey, if you dumped certain products or animals here and you live in it, you're not. I just don't understand why they were so dumb. Why would they do that? It doesn't make sense to me, As a whole, you think that they would all have agreed to, hey, there's a certain area that we'll all go dump all this stuff to, to help keep our sections clean. Well, it seems to me
that somewhere on the lower level, instead of people living down there, that's where they would have dug their holes to get rid of all this waste.
Right.
But the problem with that is, too, when the smell comes up, you got it all through the clothes. What gets me is people living in something like that.
I guess people still live underground in tunnels and stuff, too, because you have the homeless people who go deep into the tunnels.
But they have no choice.
Well, yeah, but even then, they're still taking care of themselves, because I've watched a lot of homeless documentaries and everything else, so I just don't understand why. But I suppose they had all those restaurants and stores and everything and dumping their stuff right down onto these people, and they couldn't control that, and whatever's up on the sewer, people dumping all up above them comes down into the sewer, I'm sure was also draining down into there too, so they were basically had no choice.
That's a good point too, because even though they did have some sort of a sewer system back then, it wasn't perfect. And the people that lived above ground, especially the wealthy, they didn't care where that waste went.
Right.
As it wasn't in their home, that's all they cared about. It just, they just didn't care.
But aren't they having, I swear that these people, and there's several, ghost shows that were on TV where they had gone in there and stuff. Now, didn't those people have experiences as well as when they were in there? I mean, aren't people...
Well, they claim they did, but I'm going to tell you, I don't put too much
stock in TV shows. Yeah, I know.
Those TV shows, not at all.
No, I know, but I meant there are people who are going that are having experiences.
Because for one thing, those shows are edited.
Oh, I know. And manipulated.
And manipulated. And even if they didn't see anything, they're going to make it seem like they did.
Well, right, but that's why it's titled drama, just like a soap opera. But I meant there's other people besides just them, that these people are going there and exploring this stuff, and they are sharing their evidence with their photos, EVPs, and what have you on YouTube. So I find it kind of interesting. I think this might be one of the places I might visit,
I would love to visit this place, just because when I first saw it on one of the so-called ghost shows, I just became fascinated with it, because I couldn't imagine that many people living underground that close.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I mean, even with doors on your room.
With animals. Don't forget that.
Yeah, and with animals, you didn't really have privacy. And you weren't even safe in there. It wasn't like it was a safe haven to go to, because crime ran rampant in that place. I can understand why it would be haunted. And it had over 600 people living in that close. And that close, even though it was 7 stories deep, wasn't really that big.
I don't know. It's fascinating, the fact, but I know that there's a lot of other um, areas that built underground towns as well.
Well, nowadays you have people that build these earth homes, which
That's
are
different, though.
part of them are underground, and then you got a part that's a little bit above ground,
Right.
or just the front of the house that sticks out. It's built into a hillside. Um, y- People, there was a time people lived in caves. To this day, you know, people people who want to get away from civilization live in a cave. Personally, I couldn't do it, but
Who lives
that's
in a
just
cave?
me.
I don't know anybody who goes in a cave, but I know that people go off the grid. They go to
They go
Alaska
off the grid,
and they
yeah.
go out in the wilderness. They're open in free air and whatnot. I don't know anybody who wants to go live in a cave.
And the thing of it is, people think, well, you're living off the grid, you're living this nice, comfortable life. No, you're not. If you've ever watched the show Life Below Zero on the National Geographic Channel,
Hmm.
these people are basically living primitive lives. Even though it's modern times, it's 2014, these people are still living primitive lives.
Yeah, if it takes one flick of a switch and we're
Mhm.
all back living in primitive time. You're not going to have no running sewer and water and electricity and grocery stores or anything else. So these people who are learning how to garden and learning how to farm and everything else, those people got the right idea, because it can happen at any time and it may never come back on. So
Yeah.
people
Well,
should learn how to take care of themselves and learn these primitive skills, because it got lost along the way through our generations when the grocery stores came into play. Really. Some people stopped growing their own
there,
food and farming
there
and
is there is a show on Destination America called uh, Hill Hillbilly Blood, Hardscrabble Life, and these are people in 2014 that live in the Appalachian Mountains.
yeah.
They live in shacks, no electricity. They all have outhouses.
No offense, but I
Um,
kind of wouldn't mind living off the grid.
well, I wouldn't mind living off the grid either because hard work doesn't bother me. But there,
I'd just make you do
these
my hard work.
people, yeah, these people make do with what they have and what they
Right.
don't have.
Well,
And
right.
they have a barter system where, if they want something, they don't have the money for it, they'll work it off or they'll trade or whatever.
Right.
But these people live primitive lives.
Wasn't that there this place where was it? Is it in the desert? They also this big mining town where everybody lived underground as well, sort of like Mary King's Close. What was that place called? Because they had
I
churches
don't
and
know,
everything under there.
but there's a place in Africa, Australia, where the
Australia. Yeah,
where
that's it.
the entire town, and it is a mining town, where the entire town live underground. And the reason they do that, though, is that particular area gets so hot.
Right.
Living underground helps keep them cool. And
I mean, they're not
these
100%
old,
underground because they still had some parts of it coming out. The doors or windows would come out
right.
to land,
But
exposed
they
land,
would,
but then they lived
but these were
underground, mining
old
tunnels and stuff.
caves and tunnels and stuff that they had sealed up, and they turned them into homes. I mean, we're not talking about one room homes here. We're talking about 3 and 4 rooms
A
to these
kitchen,
homes.
yeah, kitchen, living
Kitchen,
room,
living room,
and then a
bedroom,
couple
bathroom.
bathroom. Yeah, and it looked really fascinating and stuff. I guess the reason I'm talking about it is because we're talking about I guess our topics tonight are talking about subterranean living. Really, if you think about it, underground living is basically our type of theme tonight, and it's fascinating because it's not just over in England, but it's several places where they've had people living underground back in the day. So
Hmm.
it's not
Well,
that uncommon, I guess.
well, there was in Scotland, and this is actually a true story.
Not
They
something
were
you're
called
making up.
the Sawyer Bean was the name of the man,
Uh huh.
and him and his entire family lived in a cave. But these people were cannibals,
Ooh, yeah.
and
Bleh.
yeah, they would kidnap travelers and they would take them home and eat them. And so you know, Scotland does have a history of people living underground.
Well, yeah, but there's I think they also had some in Russia and
Russia.
a few other places, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we're talking about abandoned urban stuff again, like we did before, but picking different places. But I guess this is our much more topic because we kind of get off topic. Sometimes our thoughts go derailed and we talk about a little variety of everything because that's just kind of like what we do
Well,
when we have our
that's
Skype
what
calls anyway.
that's true. Like I said, Raven and I talk a lot on Skype, and sometimes sometimes we'll start a subject and then one of us will get off on another subject,
But it's all connected
and
in a way. Yeah.
yeah, and then the other one will get off on another subject, and somehow we always seem though to come back to our original topic.
Yeah, that's what the funny thing. Everything's like one big web and everything's connected. And you first start off on one thing and then you find out it's tied into this, then it's tied into this and it's tied into this, and then you're into something you never thought existed or thought of, and then it brings you to something else. So it's like we have never-ending conversations and always come back to the start of it. So I guess it's going to happen on our shows occasionally as well. So that's why we put at the end and much more, because we never know what we're going to add to it or what's going to come out or what tidbit of information Spooky might teach somebody, how to make soap next week. No, I'm just kidding. Not next week. But I find it fascinating about the Mary King's clothes. I think it's disgusting that these people had to live in that type of environment.
Right.
I don't think it probably started off that way, but the fact that it continued to fall that way.
I'm sure when this place was built, they had good intentions, but it's like everything else. The unsavory move in. And it just, and of course, when that happens, then your entire plans for this place seem to go out the window because the
yeah,
scenario has changed. These people wanted a place to live. They started building down into the ground.
I wonder if it was the richest way to push the...
Rich people owned some of those tenements.
Oh, yeah?
They knew about this place. They knew how bad this place was, but all they cared about was their rent. Because rich people did own tenements in the close.
I'm thinking that the rich offered certain things to help push the poor and the unsavory type people down underground so the upper part of the city would be more pleasant and appealing for all those who had the money.
Well,
so why not shove the poor down there, So it's kind of, I can see that happening.
Was it. You're wealthy, you live in a wealthy neighborhood. You don't want unsavory people coming in. You don't want poor people coming in and living there. You don't want people pitching tents and living in the alley. This is probably a thing where they knew the poor existed. They just didn't want to see them.
Right. So they kind of came up with something.
And it's still that way with some. Not everybody. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get hate mail on that, but it's still that way in some places, even in some places in the United States.
It is.
It's like the homeless. Mm-hmm. They know people are homeless. They just don't want to see them.
Well, they don't care either. But there's so much money and so much food that's wasted from. I know we're getting off topic, but grocery stores and restaurants are always throwing out stuff at the end of the night, or throwing stuff away before it's almost expired. And think of all that food you could go and donate to homeless shelters or to feed the poor or what have you. But, and gas stations, they have fried chicken, all this stuff all night long. And then at the end, we know what they do? They go out to the dumpster, they dump all the food in the dumpster, all those sandwiches that are about to expire and everything, and they dump bleach on it because they don't want the homeless going through their garbage can, eating the food, and then if they happen to get sick, come back and sue. Why even dump it in there? Why not give it to the homeless shelters or whatever and, make deals with them? But there's all this food that's constantly being wasted, So,
oh, yeah.
And I know we got off topic, but that's kind of what happens when we talk about a little variety of things. So, sorry.
Back in Edinburgh during this time, though,
right,
there were a lot of royalty and well-to-do people that came into the city, because people one of the things that the royalty did was when they were looking for spouses for their kid, for their daughter or their son, they would invite other royalty in and cater to them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't want all this royalty coming in and seeing all of these poor
Unsightly
people,
things hanging around.
unsightly things.
That's
So
their
that
thought,
could,
not ours. But yeah.
yeah, so that could also be another reason why the close was built. Who knows?
Well, I
There's
think there's probably a multitude of why all of this exists. And now, like you said, Edinburgh was becoming extremely overpopulated, so they built down and
yes, it was.
they built down, they built out, up, and they built out as much as they could. And people who had the means to live in certain areas got to live there, and people who could only afford what they could afford lived in other areas, and probably the closest was for the people who didn't have as much money.
And this took place before Scotland became under came under English rule.
Right.
Because there was a time when Scotland was, well, basically you could say it was free, and then it came under English rule, and then because of their battles and stuff, they won their freedom again. But they're still, to this day, they're still part of the United Kingdom. They just basically rule themselves.
Right. It makes me wonder what that George, I mean, because I didn't get to read the book, but I wonder what that George Sinclair's book, Satan's Invisible World, I mean, he must have wrote some savory stuff about the close and Mary King's Close down there, to get people to change their ways. It must have been, you know what I mean? Just, it must have been pretty bad if, with all the savory different people down there.
It had to have been horrible, really, living there. And
with hookers, this, that, and everything else, as I'm saying.
Well, and not only
about.
that, it wasn't just unsavory people that lived there. There were entire families that were forced down in there.
But also in his book, in that Satan's Invisible World by George Sinclair, they're also talking about the different haunting experiences that people would experience down there and what happened to them. And some of them fled, and some, I don't know, I guess something happened to one of them and they just, freaked out and died. Probably have a heart attack or something. I'm not 100% sure. I'm just kind of going off of the tidbits of what they had on there.
And as bad as the bubonic plague was back during that time, it ran rampant in the close.
Well,
and like I said, in all three of the closes.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, Mary King's Close was the largest. It had the most people in it. The most people that died was in this particular one. I think if I remember what I read, that the other two closes are not accessible.
I think they got damaged by fire and some other things.
Yeah, and I'm not even real sure if they even remember where they're at, because Mary King's Close was rediscovered by accident.
It was reopened at one point, and then I think over time it got built over again, and then it was discovered.
It did.
They closed it up with the plague, and then they reopened it when Edinburgh started to get overpopulated.
After the plague, people still lived in it until I think it said the 19th century.
And then it started to get closed up and built over again, and then I think in the 80s is when they rediscovered it again.
All of that was above ground was flattened and destroyed, and they built the Royal Exchange over it.
Oh yeah, that's right.
To get into it, you have to go to the Royal Exchange.
Well, if anybody's rich that's listening, if they want us, take us all to go, I'd totally go. Because I kind of want to go to this place. It's fascinating. It's there's a lot of places over in Europe and overseas that I totally want to see. There's like so many places out there that to me would be have more haunting experiences, from the castles to what have you, because they have a lot more.
I love going through the old castles over there in Europe, in England, and I was over there for a little while, and mostly Germany, but I love going through those old castles, and just about every one of them has a tour that goes through them. Although today there are still, some of those castles are still occupied. But the ones that they run the tours through, you could walk into just about any room in them, because they all have such a rich history that you can feel the temperature change. You can feel something in the room with you. I firmly believe that most of them, if not all of them, are haunted.
Right. Or I'd also like to go to the Great Wall of China. You know, because that has to have some spirits attached to it with how much work that they did in some of the areas that wall's built in is very treacherous.
Oh
And I can
yeah, and
only imagine
a lot of people died building that
that's
wall
what I'm
too.
saying. So that's something else that I'd be attracted to go check out as well. And I'm sure, you know, the Nazi camps and all that stuff, I'm sure they definitely have leftover energies and what have. There's so many different
Yeah,
places that.
I went to Dachau,
Mhm.
and it's one of the few that is still standing. I think there's only actually two of them that's still standing, and I couldn't go through the gate. You have to go through a gate to get on the property, and then they give you a tour in there.
Mhm.
And I started to go through the gate, and I couldn't do it. I just froze. I'm not kidding. Every hair on my arms stood up. And it was just, and all I could feel was just evil. That's all I could feel. I couldn't feel anything else but evil. And I just said, nope, I'm not going in there. It was the same way with the Velisca axe murder house. I couldn't go in that one either. If I feel evil, I just can't go into a place.
That's why you never invite me over. No, I'm just kidding. No, I do. I think it's pretty fascinating. I know that there's more stories out there that people are sharing from their own experiences about Mary King's Close. And I do believe that they're actually having these experiences. I do believe that they are seeing these things. If they're true hauntings or if they're residual, that's something I can't answer, you know. But that would freak me out, just seeing an arm floating around wanting to shake your hand, you know.
I know that would totally freak me out too.
It'd be like, what's
and
that?
The thing of it is, seeing an apparition does not bother me.
Right.
It's not. I mean, it's startling at first. You know, I mean, if you're going through a place and you happen to see one, and oh, you become a little startled, and then, you know, it's just fascinating to watch them. Unless you're actually there and not, even I can't tell all the time, but you can usually tell an intelligent haunting from a residual. And I have encountered actually more residual hauntings than I have actual intelligent hauntings.
Over at the Cheney Mansion or whatever it
Well,
was.
not only there, but other places. You know, that's like Halloween. I'm going to Pier Marquette Lodge for the ghost tour.
Oh, awesome.
So hopefully I'll get good pictures. And
Are you gonna bring a digital recorder?
oh yeah, I'm gonna take my camcorder. I'm gonna take my camera. I'm gonna take my digital voice recorder. You know, I'm going loaded for bear. I'm gonna go.
Right. Well, that would be cool. I guess if you get something, then we'll have to do a paranormal talk show and share some of that stuff that you may capture.
Oh yeah,
that'd be awesome. If anything, you have to share with me.
If I get anything at all, I'm gonna share it.
Share with me. Well, I think. What do you say we, end the show a little bit early, and then you tell everybody what our next week's show is going to be?
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our mods for doing a good job. And join us next week, October 28th, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. We will be discussing the history of Halloween. Also, in the second part of the show, we are going to invite our listeners to call in to share your scary Halloween stories and traditions.
And paranormal experiences, too.
And paranormal experiences. And don't forget to share us on Facebook.
Yeah, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and or our Ustream site. And we also have a new Facebook page up called Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven, where you can go there and get notified of the next week's shows. And you can also watch us live off of our Facebook stream or page with the Ustream Live button. And you can see all of our podcasts there on
Listen to us live, not watch us. Listen to us.
Oh, I apologize. Listen to us and or see some photos that we share during our shows. Yeah, because it's more of a talk show, not a video chat show. So thank you, everybody, for coming in. And thanks to our mods as well. And thank you, Spooky, for an interesting show tonight.
And thank you.
Night.
For letting me be here.
Oh, woohoo. All right, good night.
Good night, everybody.